Hello, I'm Peter Deegan, member of the RSSL QP training faculty, and welcome to the next podcast in our series of My QP Journey. These interviews are aimed at talking with previous QP training alumni with the aim of paying forward their experiences to prospective trainee QPs. Travelling down the QP training journey requires dedication, tenacity, curiosity, and of course a passion for our true customers, our patients. Of course, the first undertaking of anyone wishing to take such a journey is to learn from those who have already trodden that path, so that we may gain from their insight, their wisdom, their know-how, and also as well listen to the best shortcuts and avoid the potholes. It's therefore my pleasure to welcome Ben Broadbent, who's recently completed their QP training journey and successfully passed their QP Viva. Welcome, Ben, and very importantly, many congratulations on your huge achievement. Welcome to the QP community.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me. Appreciate that.
It would be good, firstly, if you could share your background, qualifications, and industrial experience, Ben.
Yeah, sure. So I registered as a pharmacist in 2013. So after 4 years of university and a year of pre-registration training, kind of split between industry and hospital, I joined the industry on a kind of a graduate program and did various different rotations around supply chain, manufacturing, and quality assurance. So kind of left the pharmacy profession as such. I've not actively been a pharmacist for a very long time at all. Kind of launched straight into that industrial pharmacist setting since kind of qualifying. My kind of experience continued after the graduate program. So I was a frontline production manager for a sterile product on a sterile facility for almost 3 years. Then kind of moved around the company in supply chain roles. And for the last kind of 5 to 6 years, I've been in quality assurance at a manufacturing site based in the Northwest. So I've got some experience in supporting kind of commercial packaging facilities, experience in commercial tablet manufacture, nasal spray formulations, and aseptic formulation activities as well. So that's kind of my background.
Thank you for that. Now, we met about 5 years ago. It was actually before the COVID pandemic, around about 2018, wasn't it?
Right.
When you came to me through a contact and asked my advice on whether or not to take the QP journey. As you said, you were a graduate pharmacist on the program, just really sort of starting your career. And if I remember rightly, you weren't really that much aware of the QP role itself, hence the exploratory chat. Can you remember what advice I gave you at that time?
I think the advice was along the lines of if you want to do it, be sure that you want to do it. I think our discussion and some of my reflections afterwards were, it was likened a little bit to doing a PhD or committing to something at that level. I think, yeah, to make it a success, you've really got to want to do it for yourself and, for you, whether it's a professional thing, whether it's a personal kind of achievement that you want to do, your heart's really got to be in it. And I think I took that reflection from yourself and a number of other QPs that I spoke to quite early on. I think, as you say, my understanding of the role of the QP and the responsibility kind of evolves every time you speak to a QP, reflecting on their different experiences. So one of my takeaways is through the training process, if you really want to do it, do make sure that your heart's in it, I think, because it's can be quite tough.
Thank you for that reflection, because you're right, the QP journey isn't for everyone. And with you being a pharmacist, you said you came into pharmaceuticals early on. You really weren't a practicing community pharmacist. As a pharmacist, you have a much broader set of career options in some ways than just working in quality assurance or pharmaceutical manufacture. You can work in the community where you're much closer to the patient than you are in a factory. In fact, I've coached and mentored several pharmacists, some of whom have actually gone back into the community. So what drove you to stay in pharma and take this QP journey? You've mentioned that you'd had a rotation, a few roles in QA, but what made you stay?
So I was lucky enough to work for a pharmaceutical company while I was still at university. So in between my third and fourth year of university, I had a kind of 10-week placement working in a commercial manufacturing facility. And to be honest, I got the bug. Prior to that, my options were working in a hospital or working within community pharmacy. And to an extent, a lot of pharmacists see that as their options. I think a number of pharmacists will see the industrial setting as, you have to specialize, you have to have a PhD, you have to have that kind of strong scientific acumen in a very specific field of the industry to progress in industry. And actually, I found that that's not the case at all. So to answer the question, I got the bug quite early on. I recognized that the pharmacy degree gave me quite a broad knowledge in whether it's pharmaceutics, whether it's sterile manufacturing, it's GMP. It gave me access to numbers of different dosage forms, which is actually quite unique in terms of a university degree. So to come into an industry where I can kind of use all of that and use some of the scientific and patient focus, that 10 weeks really kind of unlocked that potential. And while I was here for 10 weeks, I met a number of pharmacists across the regulatory setting, the manufacturing setting, the supply chain setting. And I realized that what a good set of skills to have if you want to make, supply and sell pharmaceutical products, having that background and direct patient focus. So yeah, a little bit of the background as kind of why I chose to do that, but also I got the bug. I think you have to be a certain type of person to walk onto a pharmaceutical packing line in a commercial facility and just kind of want more of that. The products are right in front of you. You're making 100,000 packs of the things. Like, it's unlike anything you've ever seen.
I love that. I'm a pharmaceutical geek myself. I have loved working in this industry the whole of my career. Every day is different, but it's not for everybody. So I really like your reflection for that, particularly any pharmacist listening into this podcast can reflect really on there is an excellent career opportunity within the pharmaceutical environment and the different roles, one of which is the qualified person. As you said, in your undergraduate work, it does dispense you from having to do the full amount of training that, say, a chemist or a biologist would require. And we're going to explore that in a minute. Okay, so you've decided to become a QP, or take the QP journey at least. How did you start to analyze what's required versus your experience and knowledge requirement? As we have said before, the regulations and guidance are very clear. If you're a pharmacist, you only have to take 1 year of practical experience, for example. The reason why I ask that is, in any case, it's a lot of data to assimilate, and it can be very daunting and a bit of a blocker to start. Where do I start? How do I start? So how did you approach it?
So, and you're absolutely right. It is, I'll use the word overwhelming. If you want to start your QP journey, it's something that you're interested in, some other QPs. Somebody pointed me in the direction of the study guide at that time. I kind of thought, oh, this will be interesting. I'll look at what I did at university. I've got a couple of years experience now. And it honestly started with an Excel spreadsheet. And I kind of looked at what the requirements were, and I sort of looked at what my experience was. And I still remember it. It was, I said a red if I've got nothing, an amber if I sort of know something about that, and a green if I think, yeah, do you know what, that's okay. I mean, this was a number of years ago, and how that develops, of course, but that's honestly how it started. It was me in a room with a study guide, seeing what I knew and what I didn't know. But what that did was it allowed me to explore the full scope of what a QP was expected to know, certainly from a study guide perspective. And from then, it built from there. I was lucky enough to know QPs and work with QPs at the facilities that I've worked on. And it's important to make some friends, I would say, for others that have gone through that journey, get to know other trainees, see how they're approaching that as well. Because if you're finding it daunting, everyone's found it daunting to begin with. And there is there's no set process, there's no set way of doing it. It's a case by case on your kind of background and experience. So even as a pharmacist with, I'd say, quite a good knowledge base from a degree and a little bit of the clinical setting as well, there were still a number of gaps that I knew I needed to explore. But, you make some connections and you get some colleagues to support with that, help, mentor and coach. And ultimately, it kind of led to a sponsorship discussion formally on a manufacturing facility in the end. But it was me that did that initial exploratory work. I did my own little assessment, and then I started working with my contacts in quality to be able to expand on that and make it a little bit more formal. But I think I kind of had to do that bit myself to begin with.
That's very interesting. Very self-awareness, really, isn't it, about your own skills, etc., rather than taking just an identical path that others would have taken. Did you therefore, from that spreadsheet that you created, did that allow you to understand where you already had the experience and therefore you exempted yourself from certain modules? Or did you take all the modules, both as academic training, classroom training? How did you approach it?
So I think to be perfectly honest, some of the greens that I put down were probably a bit ambitious, shall we say, versus the true requirements of the study guides. And when you start looking at some of the Viva questions from a past Vivas, you sort of think, oh, maybe I didn't know that as well as I did. But it was a starting point. So it did help me to decide what modules I was going to do and which ones I wasn't going to do. And in the end, there was only one that I didn't do, and that was medicinal chemistry and therapeutics, just because I'd say a relatively extensive clinical background and training, and thought, I think I can defend myself with some of this stuff on the central nervous system and types of drugs and things like that, different therapeutic areas, interactions, that kind of thing, which is critical for the QP to know about. But as a pharmacist, it was a little bit second nature as to what I'd gone through quite extensively in my clinical training.
And I like the way you've analysed that on a gap analysis basis and taken that step, really, which I think is very sensible. So we look at the study guide, and it gives you the 3 core modules, which I want to explore in a bit more detail in a short while, and then the other modules. So we've got 12 courses really to cover, and you said the medicinal substances and therapeutics. I like what you said. You felt you could defend yourself enough because of your background. That's just the theory, though. The joint study guide is very clear, and it says that the applicant is expected to be able to demonstrate the application of this knowledge through experience, at least 2 years or 1 year for a pharmacist. We know, however, that the feedback from assessors is that many first written applications get rejected because the candidate hasn't met that practical breadth expected. So when you started your QP journey, you say you're on a graduate rotation program, you knew several formulations. Where were you on that experience meter? Did you look at the theory first and say, I'll pick the experience up? Or did you look at the experience first and see where the theory gaps were?
I think by the time, because it was a number of years after I'd joined the graduate program before I actually started the QP journey, it was maybe about 5 years later. Throughout that time, I was building my experience. And then when it came to kind of formally, I'm on the QP training, I'm kind of doing that. I'd actually worked with a number of different dosage forms by that time. So I think prior to that, it would have been very theoretical. And I think I would have struggled to demonstrate that experience that's required in the application. But, I was lucky enough that the site I work on has got a number of different dosage forms. As kind of said, we've got tablets, we had nasal spray formulation, we had commercial packing, we had aseptics as well, all of which I kind of worked on, or I'd been frontline QA to support a number of these activities. So my experience was building, should we say, at that time. However, there were still gaps. And I think my reflection is that you can't be an expert in everything. And a number of different QPs have told me this when I was kind of through Viva practice and things like that. I remember coming up to my Viva, I remember thinking, I've not got an experience with PMDIs, as an example. It's not something I've ever come across. I've watched maybe 20 YouTube videos on how to, on a PMDI facility. But when it came to, my practical experience, I didn't have that. And I remember it being a real worry for me at the time, but actually that's where your network's really important. You come across other trainee QPs, you come across other QPs, and it's really important that you talk to them about these types of processes that you don't have that experience of. So to answer the question, yes, the practical experience built over time, and I was retrospectively added some of that theory to it and sort of polished it off and was able to support it in my application. But I think it's really important that you could spend your entire career trying to cover every single dosage form, whereas using your network was really, really important to be able to establish some of those gaps and fill them really as best you can.
That resonates quite strongly with me because just last week I was a tutor on the formulation and processing module, and the feedback from the delegates was, wow, that is overwhelming. Am I expected to know every single thing? Talk about meter dose inhalers. We had a case study on that, and everybody's going, whoa, how am I possibly expected to know that level of detail, the level of chemistry and formulation? And I suppose what we were able to do as the tutors is just put that into perspective. You clearly need to understand your core primary formulations for which you'll be on the license for your qualified person to be able to do certification of. And you've got to know that inside out, and you've got to have a higher than professional experience awareness. You've got to really know that because that's the certification process. However, the way that we visualized it, there are some core additional blobs that you've really got to have cornered. Parenterals, understanding different types of formulations, etc. Because at the Viva, you may well be asked questions to say, do you understand other formulations sufficiently to be able to make a judgment? You may well not be the certifying QP. You may well be working in a company. You may well change company, and therefore you may well change formulations. And I guess the assessors are trying to understand what is your capability to extrapolate your core understanding to a peripheral knowledge, but it's at a minimum professional level. So I think that's really what the formulation processing course last week taught everybody is, don't be an expert, but be able to articulate a question. You may well be asked an MDI, you may well be asked a tableting an oral solid dose, a cream formulation. This has gone wrong with that formulation. This has gone wrong. You've got a customer complaint on this. How are you going to break it down and analyze the core safety, efficacy, and quality requirements?
Yeah. And I think going into the Viva, I probably knew a lot more about PMDIs than I thought I ever would. And actually, it was probably one of my better subjects, despite never having actually seen the line. And, the theory was really strong. And I think it resonates with what you're saying. I think, if I was to change companies, and yes, PMDIs is something that they do, there's an element of, professional duty and code of practice that means I need to understand that. And I would really take my time to understand those products and the CQAs. And it's good that that's kind of built into the journey of the QP, to have that appreciation for knowing what you're certifying as well. So that's kind of built into some of the practice elements of what I do.
Now, you're a working professional in a pharmaceutical company with a very clear bounded set of formulations, but the new generation of roles, and particularly QPs, we've got lots of QPs working in virtual companies, in merchanted companies, etc., where we're using CDMOs and CMOs to manufacture a wider breadth of formulations. So that's why, as an assessor, I feel it's important to understand how much breadth that person has for the period of their professional career, really, I think. So you've done your spreadsheet analysis, you've understood the areas which are green, amber, and red, you've taken a training path, and you've built experience in different formulations, either core formulations or, as you said, the PMDI example was a good example. I guess it's having that confidence to walk into the interview room set of knowledge rather than a professional experience per se. One of the critical roles in helping shape that journey for you is the sponsor. How did you obtain your sponsor?
So the company that I work for has a sort of semi-formal process for generating their trainee QP sort of process, really. So you attend the kind of informal interview with the sort of quality leadership team. You present your case as to why you want to be a QP, what gaps that you feel that you've got. So kind of a spreadsheet was a little bit more formal at this stage. And really your expression as to why you want to do this. And again, going back to the start, is your heart in it? Is it something that you're going to complete? It's quite an investment to go through the QP training. So they want to know that you're in it to win it as such. So once I've kind of been through that process, and that involved being nominated as somebody who'd been very clear in their development plan, this is something that they wanted to do, and consistent in that as well. After that nomination process and kind of expressing that I wanted to do this and some of my gaps, I was put forward into the training process locally, really. So after that, an email popped into my account, and I knew who my sponsor was going to be. Somebody relatively familiar to me. I've got a young family, and I think they appreciated that, as my sponsor had been through a similar process. And I think they recognised that the role of the sponsor, as well as kind of the nuts and bolts of meeting the needs of the study guide and challenging me with regard to my experience and practical knowledge, but also it was going to be, do you know what, this is going to be tough, and you're going to need someone to pick you up when you're down and give you a kick if you need it. And I think the sponsor I was allocated was really supportive in that area, and it was a really good choice.
Do you know, I think you make a really important point there about work, life, family balance, and to have somebody that understands your personal background, your personal circumstances, to make sure that that can be accommodated.
I'd say as I got towards the end of the training, it was really challenging. It was probably one of the most challenging things. I remember my head of quality alluded to me at the start of the QP journey. She said, "Look, this will be the hardest thing you ever do." And I sort of knew what she meant, and I sort of didn't. And I think my reflection afterwards is technically attending courses and learning theory and getting some practical experience. That is quite tough. It's part of the job. I think my reflection is it's the hardest thing I ever did to try and fit it in around everything else and life. And I think that's going back to your heart's got to be in it, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in life that can sort of distract away from this. And sometimes that's right, and that's okay. And it's being able to balance that. So honestly, I think some of those times late at night, early in the morning, and finding the opportunities to do that were some of the more challenging times of the QP journey, certainly towards the last 6 months.
And that's where the sponsor picks you up, motivates you, keeps you laser focused on that prize, really.
It is. So the role of the sponsor there is really important to keep that consistency. I think my sponsor was very good in knowing that I was driving this. It was my bus to drive as such. It wasn't, my sponsor wasn't going to do it for me. And so I think he recognized where I was with my family. He knew it might not have been right to push at that time, but he was very good in knowing when to support me and when to kind of lead me to it a little bit as well. So I think the role of the sponsor is really critical. Towards those last 6 months, I knew what I was going to do. I was going to pass that Viva, and I wasn't going to do it to my family again, basically.
So having an experienced sponsor, coach, mentor, rescuer, focuser is absolutely paramount to keep your eye on that prize, as you said.
Yeah.
So we've got a sponsor, we've got a program of work. I want to explore some of the modules now, particularly the 3 foundation knowledge elements. Okay, because those are the ones that are presented first in the joint study guide. And it says, the law and admin role and professional duties of the qualified person, the pharmaceutical quality system. They are real central for a reason. So how did you approach your learning of these modules? How did you keep these 3 interconnected at the top throughout your learning journey, even though you were deep diving into statistics, to formulation and the other diverse modules? How did you keep that at the top?
So I did mine a little bit out of sync. So the law and administration and the pharmaceutical quality system and the roles of the QP, they weren't the first modules that I did. And to an extent, I kind of wish they were. The law and administration side of things is very detailed. It's very complex, and it's ever changing. Even in the period of time I was doing my QP, significant regulatory changes across commercial and IMP and veterinary as well, which I kind of needed to keep abreast of, really. So in terms of it being out of sync, it was kind of good in a way that it was closer to the Viva, so I could kind of focus on that. But when I did law and administration and I did roles and duties of the QP, I look back at some of the theory I'd learned, and I look back at some of my experience, and I think, oh, that's where that came from. oh, right, that's why, this specification comes from here and it's important because of this standard and this regulation. It was very, the retrospective was very important to provide a lot of context to what I'd learned, really. If that sort of makes sense, I think there's a lot of underpinning stuff that comes from law and administration and the QP and the PQS module, which then supports everything else. So it was a bit of a light bulb moment. As soon as I'd done those modules, I was able to retrospectively have a look and think, oh, that's why all that's important. I think had I done them to begin with, that context would have been there from the start. So I think advice to some of the trainee QPs, or for those that are about to start that journey, consider some of the schedule, if it's available to you, to focus on some law and administration at the start. I've heard that others have done one at the start and then they've done one at the end of their journey as well. Again, context will be there from the start, and then you bang up to date with the most recent stuff. But also my advice is don't wait for the courses for that kind of thing. Subscriptions to a number of different areas, keeping abreast of what the MHRA is publishing. There's a lot out there to be able to keep you up to date as you get towards the sharp end as well. So as well as the courses, there was a lot of other information out there that I used to support and underpin some of the rest of the technical knowledge.
I think that's good advice, and not everybody can work the same linear pathway, and it's just about timing sometimes. But I hear what you're saying. I'm a tutor on the pharmaceutical quality systems course, and that's the kernel of everything to me. That's the center point. And on the course, and as I mentor trainee QPs, every single complaint, every single deviation, every single audit that we do is how does that impact the pharmaceutical quality system? We all look down at deviations in a very micronized view, and it may well be, well, the root cause was training of the operator, so we'll retrain the operator. Well, what's the capability of the pharmaceutical quality system? A lot of people forget we have now ICHQ10, and the objectives of ICHQ10 are achieve product realization, and 1.5.2, achieve a state of control. And that pharmaceutical quality system needs to be in a state of control always before that batch is manufactured. So it's not a retrospective, was it made in accordance with the right requirements? Was the quality system in a good state of control to ensure that it was?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it does underpin things, and going through some of that technical information, and reference ICHQ10 and and chapter 1 in UDRLEX, and you look at your own quality management system in your own company then, and as I said, it was that context moment to think, oh, that's why it's built as it is. Yeah, it's a few light bulb moments, as I said, as you go through those 3 core modules.
So we've done our spreadsheet. We've done a bit of theoretical training. We've started to look at different formulations. We've looked at the 3 core foundation modules, and we're starting to understand law and the role and professional duties. So we're feeling pretty confident that we can start filling our application form together with regards to applying for a Viva and getting that certification. When did you start to fill your application form? At the end or the beginning, or during the whole journey?
Do you want the honest answer, Peter, as to when I started filling out my application form?
Yes.
So I had an application form pretty much from the start, and it contained copied and pasted each of the different elements of the study guide within it as title headers and nice spaces underneath to be able to fill in my experience. And yeah, I filled it in the last 6 months of my QP journey, and there may well be some people creasing at that statement. However, I made my peace with it because it's how I work. It's how I've always operated. So in university, even going back to school, I was always I need a bit of pressure to be able to do this. But however, I completely appreciate not everybody works that way. People are different. I work best if that's the scenario that I find myself in. And so I had a mock Viva, it was booked, and they asked, oh, could we see your application form? And I thought, yeah, you can. So I had probably 3 weeks where I made a plan. I knew what I was going to do. I'd filled in the application form. I put in all of my relevant experience. line by line through the study guide, I worked very, very hard to be able to get everything in that I needed. It wasn't the polished article, it wasn't perfect, but in all honesty, sort of warts and all, which I think is really important for trainees to hear, is that no, my application form was at the end of the process. And honestly, I found some benefits for that because by that stage, I'd got my experience. It wasn't something that I needed to add to piecemeal over that time. It's not something I could have done in my way of working. Those last few weeks and months, and actually writing the application form, springboarded me to give me the confidence to say, oh, actually, look at this. Look at all of this stuff I've done. And I put it all together in a relatively short space of time. Honestly, it gave me a bit more confidence to kind of put it all together in one go. It comes with the disclaimer that I know other people don't work like that and they can't work like that. I'd never impose that way upon anybody. And if I'm a sponsor in the future, it's completely up to the individual how they choose to work. But consciously leaving it to the end, I knew that's how I would get my best result, to be perfectly honest.
I very much appreciate your candor there. And what I've learned from that is it fitted you. And I think that's really important. Listen to the other podcasts that we've done. We're getting a mixed view of those people saying, yes, I did it at the end and I wished I hadn't because I forgot a lot of what I'd done. And therefore the application form was more challenging for me to put a true reality to it. Others were saying, well, that was too early because I was taking quite a bit of time, etc. I think the voice of all my interviewees are saying, maybe capture some things at the time you do that, because then you've remembered more eloquently, or because then you've remembered more accurately. But I really genuinely, I'm exactly the same as you. I need a bit of pressure really for me to focus on that prize really. And that's exactly what I did at the same time all those years ago. But what underwrote that was that I'd gained a lot of experience at the time. And so therefore it was innately within me to be able to articulate it. Others may not be in that position.
I think obviously it comes with caution. If you do that towards the end, like with anything, yeah, for anyone who works in QA, you know you're at the end of that process as well. Yeah, it took some support with reviewing of the sponsor. And as I said, it wasn't the polished article first time round, and there was probably 3, 4, 5 iterations that it went through. However, by the time it was written, I was confident, my sponsor was confident, and ultimately it went through the first time with the assessors.
So we've done the training, we've done the experience, we've eventually filled the application form in with our sponsors' support, and we've submitted it, and we've got a Viva. How did you prepare for your Viva?
I'm glad you asked me this. So, in terms of timescales, and again, this won't be the same for everybody. So I kind of submitted my application in the September of last year, 2024. Waited for those kind of 8 weeks for feedback to say that I'd got my Viva, and then my Viva date was the following February. In the time that I'd submitted and I was sort of waiting for the Viva nod, we had our second child in September. So, you know, you talk about timing, to be honest. And I think going back to life happens, and I'll continue to talk about the Viva preparation itself, but I think it's important from the context perspective for the trainees out there to understand maybe a little bit my journey. But the day I started my formal QP training, it was the PQS course. My daughter was born the month after. She was my first child. And by the time that I'd finished my QP training and I'd got my application in, my daughter was 3.5 and my son had just been born. So, you know, life happens. So to be perfectly honest, I knew that my son was coming in September. So I'd really used the time kind of over that summer working with the QPs on site to practice. And my struggle wasn't the technical detail. You know, I can sort of retain that sort of stuff. It was okay. My problem was always structure. It was always how to structure an answer so it's logical, it follows through, you don't forget the core stuff, and ultimately you can sit in front of the Viva assessors and they know that you'd be all right in a not just this Viva setting, but any scenario in a pharmaceutical company or an issue that would arise. So mine was always structured. So I really practiced the structure kind of all the way from March to, sort of like September, basically, the 17th, the day before my son was born. And then as soon as my son was born, I had parental leave. So from September to January, I was off for 3 months. And that was a decision that my wife and I took to have some time out. And full disclosure, all honesty, the books were down. I was focusing on my son. I was focusing on supporting my wife and my family at home. And for me, it actually ended up being the best thing I ever did to take a bit of a break. Now, I wouldn't advise everyone to take 3 months, 2 months before their Viva, but I'd worked so hard to cram in technical detail, technical knowledge in advance. So I was Viva ready September, and that's some of the feedback I've had. It's like you were ready before you went off on parental leave. Having those 3 months off, I'll say doing nothing. It's not true. I was doing lots of things at home with my son and my daughter. But when I came back in January, I had to hit the ground running again. I had to pick it up. I had to get into the technical detail. I had to make sure that my structure was still solid and also keep abreast of any updates that had happened. The Windsor framework happened just as I was off. So I needed to really keep up to speed with that. So my preparation for the Viva was quite disjointed, I'd say. But I've heard it from other people. Just, they might go on holiday, they might have a bit of a break, they might just do something just to take themselves out. It really worked for me. And ultimately, because I put the work in to begin with and I knew this was happening, that kind of led into that. Don't get me wrong, it was hard. I found myself up at 4 o'clock in the morning because when my son had woken up and he'd just gone back to sleep, and I thought, I'm awake now, may as well do some revision. And late at night, everyone's in bed. That's when I'm going to do my revision. So it was really hard. But again, I'll keep going back to it. I really wanted to do it. I really want to be a QP. And I really wanted to pass that Viva and give myself this opportunity within the pharmaceutical industry as the QP. So kind of going back to that initial discussions, do you really want to do this? I probably did it quite the hard way when it came to the cancer Viva preparation and really trying to balance that with family life. Few rocky moments, but that's the warts and all of my Viva preparation.
Awesome. Congratulations, by the way, on your birth of your second child. And I love the fact that in your long-term memory, your QP journey is initiated by the birth of your first child and ended with the birth of your second child. You're never going to forget that, are you?
No. So they had a lot of advice: do it before you have children, and yeah. Anyway, no, it works out. But again, life, it happens.
Oh, that is highly resonant with a lot of people, including myself. Don't forget life while you're doing this. It is a career benefit, an option, but balance it out with that work, family, and life. It's really important. And sometimes taking time off is really important. I think the final message really is work, life, family balance. Don't overbalance, don't underbalance. Do it at the right time that meets everybody's needs. I'll repeat what you said. It's tough.
Yeah.
And you've got to be self-motivated to do that. But the purpose behind these podcasts is paying it forward, paying it backwards to the next generation. And I really like what you say. You may well have the great privilege of becoming a QP sponsor in the future, and somebody going on the same journey at the same time. You can be their guide, their mentor, their advisor to help them through a similar journey. My final question, Ben, is about the Viva itself, not necessarily the questions that were asked. That's well documented elsewhere. Two things. Did the application form help you in your Viva? That's question one.
Yes, and I'll explain why. So when I finally wrote my application form, line by line, I was going through the study guide. And I kind of said I pulled out the headings of each of the different elements of the study guide that I needed to have knowledge or practically working experience of. And so writing the application form, it brought things to the forefront of my mind. And I'll say less so with some of maybe the formulation and processing and some stuff that I just got practical experience of. But when it came to things like law and administration, something that is not, it's not at the forefront of your mind all of the time, line by line, what's the content and structure of a marketing authorization? What's the content and structure of an MIA? What's the content and structure of a WDA? That's something specific as a line item in the study guide. And so when it came to writing the application form, I had to go away and I had to do it. And it really prompted me to fill in some of those gaps that I didn't have. So you go on the MHRA website, you're pulling that information, you're getting your site license together to look at the structure, you're looking at marketing authorizations, you're understanding the roles and responsibilities of an MA holder. Yeah, really helped, to be perfectly honest. So the way that I structured it, certainly with those 3 core modules, was line by line. Yeah, you need to know it all. And writing the application form really pushed you in the direction of, very specifically, you need to know this. And very specifically, you need to demonstrate your understanding of it as well.
I like that. It's answer the question that's put in front of you, and the joint study guide is the questions.
Yeah.
I like your line by line. That's really astute way of looking at it.
And I think when you're a trainee QP, you get given the notes for law and administration. And mine were about this thick for law and administration. And do you know, my process was, you have a look through it, you make some high level notes, you make some detailed notes, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you can fit it on, about something about this big. But it really helped cut through a lot of stuff as to what was really important. Now, you can argue it's all important, but what's in the study guide is what you're going to be expected to defend and know in the Viva. And I think that was really good to be able to pull out. And I used the bookmarks, and I was looking at our electronic notes, and I was able to use the bookmarks and sort of go to some of these things and search for the words and really understand it. So yeah, the application form really pushed me in the direction of some of the specifics.
Thank you for that. So my second question is, I'm also a tutor on the lead auditor course, and I got some feedback from one of the delegates to say, thank you. You gave me the confidence to walk into the interview room, sit down and say, hello, I'm the auditor today. So using that as a parallel, what gave you the confidence to walk into that QP Viva interview room with 3 assessors in front of you, sit down, say, hello, I'm Ben, ask?
Preparedness, just preparation, to be honest. I think, but my reflection is that the 48 hours before the niggles started, properly, am I really ready for this? Am I going to do this? And yeah, you try and look at your books, you try and revise your notes, and nothing's going in at that stage. You've got the train down to London, you're in your hotel, and I nearly made a hole in the floor just sort of pacing around. So, that 48 hours was some of the most horrendous moments of my QP journey, because, everyone told me I'm ready, you'll be fine, it's going to be okay. But, you're always fighting your internal battles. But I knew I'd done the work, again, line by line in the study guide. I'd learned what I needed to learn theoretically, and I went in as a steriles expert for my Viva, and I knew that I'd got the practical experience for steriles. I'd covered pretty much most things that I needed to, and similarly, if they'd asked me formulation, I'd worked there too. I could cover those elements. And it's going back to what's on your application form that you've got experience of. Can you defend that across all elements of the study guide? And do you know enough, and you've practiced in some of the other elements that you might not have as much experience on? And I think walking into that room, I couldn't have done any more. I think, inclusive of not doing anything for 3 months when my son was born, I couldn't have done any more. I was giving it my best shot. And so weirdly, by the time I walked into the room, I was calm. I was okay. I'd calmed myself down as such, and don't get me wrong, I still turned up at the RSC 3 hours early to make sure I was in the right place. But I'd calmed myself down. I was okay. And I think it was just the support of family as well. I remember my dad, he kind of said to me, you'll be all right. Loads of other people have said that to me, but for some reason it really stuck with me when my dad said that. And I thought, yeah, probably will. I think you're right, Dad. So yeah, that's how it kind of landed.
Gosh, that's really interesting because I'm a Yorkshireman and my favourite phrase where we come from in Bradford is bereat.
Yeah,
It'll be okay.
yeah,
And I had that same conversation with my dad the day before my Viva. And he went, bereat, you know it. You're good enough.
yeah,
Do it.
yeah. That's basically what he said. Like, you worked hard, you'll be all right. And yeah, for some reason, I thought about that before I went into my Viva, and it carried me through a little bit. And yeah, not everyone had that experience. It'll come down to how well you feel and how well you're prepared. But a lot of work went into it with a final little push, I found.
Great stuff. And finally, then, what 3 pieces of advice would you give people who are thinking of starting the journey or halfway through the journey or ready to have their Viva and in preparation for it?
3 pieces of advice. Be sure you want to do it. I think that's been consistent through this conversation that we've had. I think there were times that relative sort of professional and personal rock bottom that you come across in sort of 3.5, 4 years of doing QP journey. Be sure you want to do it, be sure why, and have that drive that you want to do, because it can drag, and it's that monkey sitting on your shoulder. It gets heavy, right? So I think be sure that you want to do it. Be clear as to what your weaknesses are early. And I don't mean technical weaknesses. I mean, by the time that you come to do QP Journey, you'll know how you learn, you'll know how you operate, you'll know what works for you. And I think take advantage of that. So, as I said, I knew I could retain and learn technical detail. That was okay. Structure was always my problem. And that's what I hammered. That's what I practiced. That's what I was very clear with my sponsor. I was very clear with the other QPs that that's what I needed to practice. So yeah, just kind of be clear on what your learning style is, what works for you, and be selfish with it. I think that's what I'd advise, because anything else won't work, because you know it's not worked in the past. And the other thing is, I think use the people around you. I think it's not like doing the QP journey is not an isolated event. It'll be very lonely and very hard if you try and do it on your own. And sometimes, yeah, late at night, you just need to get your head in the books and just get on with it. But some of the most valuable sessions, even kind of weeks before the Viva for me, was meeting up with study buddies, getting in a group, talking about autoclave validation, talking about stuff that you don't see every day from other industries or other things. Every single interaction, whether it's with QPs in your company, trainees from other areas, every single interaction, I kind of built into my body of knowledge. So take advantage of all of those opportunities, because they genuinely are. I liken it a little bit to, it's kind of, if anyone's ever seen the film Slumdog Millionaire, you've got, there's a guy that's kind of working through, he's being asked these questions, he's relating back to his life. And honestly, that's what some of the Viva is like. You get asked a question, you think back, I remember talking about this in the study group. Oh, I remember going through this with a QP. Like you're very much drawing on your experience and taking advantage of others that are going through the same thing. Every interaction is an opportunity to pick up something you probably didn't know. So go out and find them and take advantage of them. It's probably another piece of advice.
Ben, thank you very much for very openly and candidly sharing your personal QP journey. Every journey is different, every journey is enlightening, and every journey is informative. And it's been really interesting to listen to your journey. Absolutely delighted that after that original conversation over a cup of coffee that we had 5, 6 years ago, that you've achieved that prize, and I just congratulate you. And the journey starts now, really. So, have you certified a batch?
Not yet. No, not yet. It's the plan imminently. I need to wait a little bit for the right opportunity to come up and subsequent license variations to be able to do that. But not yet. It's the plan.
Well, I'm sure that there'll be a round of applause when you actually do that inside your head, as well as probably from those watching on. So, Ben, good luck with your career. Thank you very much for your candid journey today. It's been a real pleasure. And hopefully those listening in have gained from your wisdom, your insight, and your absolute focus on that prize.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for the opportunity. It was great to see you again. And then I know this will go out on various different platforms, but if anyone wants any advice, please let me know. Please just send me a message. It's not a problem.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Ben, thank you for your time today.